They were academics. They were teachers. They were not expecting to be used as puppets in a TV studio.
Drove all the way down to Alexandra Palace. When I got there, of course, he changed his shirt for a blue shirt with one of the technicians.
Now, don't expect a conventional documentary television program.
The other thing that is remarkable now is that it was all so crude.
That vector represents... a bit tricky, actually.
Very primitive models, graphics where you had to pull bits of cardboard and they would fall over. It was hilarious in many senses.
They were not there to seduce people into knowledge. I will tell you what a quadratic equation is, and this is what it is.
Except that this time I want to solve it using orthogonality.
You rehearsed for 2 days, and then in the last hour you then shot the whole thing.
He was showing this damn thing off to the left. It looked awful.
Now the programmes are just under 25 minutes, and we had an hour to get things right.
Take 3, go on, let's do it again. It's much easier to do it now than we do it again.
Very fraught, very stressful in that hour.
The senior producer was, I thought, particularly obnoxious in regard to this.
So you had a kind of sense of family. We had a sense of family. Yours was a dysfunctional one.
Last time we ended in a state of confusion, to say the least.
The television programmes are simply the cherry on the cake. I mean, the hard grafting is done quite differently. It's not nothing to do with television.
The brains of the OU operation were 45 miles up the motorway in a place that almost no one had heard of until the 70s.
Wouldn't it be nice if all cities were like Milton Keynes?
Grid system is based on roads spaced 1 kilometer apart. It will provide an uniformly good accessibility throughout the whole area.
I didn't really have much connection with Milton Keynes when I started studying with the Open University, simply because they don't have students at Walton Hall, and you only really post essays here. I used to go and watch Alexis Sale back in the day when he used to take the piss out of Milton Keynes, and he would slightly tease the town planners and say they had to they named things like the Gary Glitter Estate and the Dave Clark 5 roundabout, Bay City Rollers Boulevard. A new town for a new way of thinking. If only it were that noble.
Basically, they thought that the Open University should start in a stately home of Britain. And after that, an ideology arose around it that this was all about, sending signals about a new university in a new town. It wasn't actually. It was just, it was available, it fitted, and therefore they went for it.
In those days, the whole campus was basically a building site, and in fact there was so much mud around that all the members of staff were issued with slippers that they had to wear around the buildings so as not to spread mud around the place.
It was very difficult to find, and one day I wasn't being very bright, and I seemed to be going round and round the same roundabouts. And there was a little old lady standing by one of them, and she thought I was stopping to give her a lift because it wasn't a particularly nice day. But I said, can you tell me where the Open University is? I don't bleeding well care.
Here was a university that most people would have struggled to recognise. For a start, there were no teenagers trying to find where the bar was or sign up for drama sock. Just a lot of academics writing lectures for students they would probably never meet.
Frank, could you sort of summarise very briefly what we talked about at that meeting?
I think the most definite thing that came out was a suggestion that...
I mean, there we were. We had a course team. We had to make a course. Nobody knew how you did this.
Academics were having to bring out into the open their lectures and their other materials, and they got published. And actually the university did quite a lot to lift the standard of teaching throughout the university system.
Units 2 to 3, Hardy and his influence, not too happy about that title.
And we had to improvise every aspect of the whole system, of what sort of course materials are appropriate for the part-time, distant learner.
Teaching science by post was particularly tricky.
Rock samples for the Earth Sciences course can't be discreetly chipped off with a hammer. The founding fathers had to put their thinking caps on and really get around the problems of students who weren't used to handling scientific equipment. Now, this is a MacArthur microscope. It's very cleverly designed, and you look down there, and lo and behold, it opens up another world. This was part of a big home experiment kit.
Take a drink from my magic potion, soon you're gonna really feel fine.
The answer was the mother of all chemistry sets, a lab in a box.
Inside those kits were glassware, chemicals, brains, sheep's brains, for instance, so that students could look at the cellular pattern. And we'd have a delivery of something like 7,000 sheep's brains to the campus every year, and told these apocryphal stories about people being brought in to cut these sheep's brains up. We became very unpopular with the post office.
I'm honestly not quite sure what one really is going to do with it at this stage.
In the early days, we sent students sound recorders through the post because people didn't have cassette recorders. Now we have them in the bathroom, in the car, and everything else. Not then. We even had to send them slide rules. Do you know what a slide rule is? Do you want to see an OU slide rule? There's an OU slide rule. No one had calculators, no one had computers. We had to send this stuff through the post.
Fashions came and went, thankfully.
0.625.
But the OU looked as if it was still stuck in the past.
And the 654?
We made programmes knowing that they would last at least 2, 3 or 4 years. What we didn't realise in the early days was that budgets would not be available to remake courses, and least of all to remake what was probably the most expensive part of the course, which was television. So many programmes made in the days of black and white went out for many, many years afterwards and became the butt of comedians' jokes.
Giving us a resultant modular quantity of 0.567359. Now, this should begin to give us some clues as to whether...
Brian, I'm sorry.
What's happened?
You said 0.567359.
Oh, no, I didn't.
It should be 0.567394.
I don't believe it!
You're coming from some working men's club and you'd be tired, you had a long drive, and oh my God, it was on in the middle of the... Oh, I didn't like that at all.
There was a man with a very big knot in his tie and Johnny Kennedy hair and sideburns talking about quantum physics.
What will we use for alpha particles?
Yeah, all right, stop it.
I watched it because it was comical, but no, it wasn't for me, basically.
A visual peg on which to hang the detailed mathematical arguments.
We did have the famous Arthur Marwick, who was the historian, and he was known for his cravats.
What is its historical significance?
You would watch a programme just to see how many times he changed his cravat.
But they do not need any obscure theory.
We dressed as we would have dressed if we'd been at a normal university.
To illustrate in visual terms the theoretical work which is discussed in the correspondence material.
Most people had not been to a university, so they didn't know how lectures looked.
But just let me quickly remind you how it goes.
It's very new for me. I hadn't done anything like that before. I think my programmes were competent. I mean, some of my colleagues were real naturals, and they tended eventually to do far more than their fair share because they did it so well.
We're all accustomed to getting and spending money, but why should somebody give something useful in exchange for pieces of paper and scraps of metal? Here's one way in which money changes hands. Could I have a whiskey and ginger, please?
I was teaching in Northern Ireland in 1970 in a College of Further Education in East Belfast, and I saw an advert for part-time tutors for the Open University, and it had just begun.
Whether you despise it or desire it just for itself or for what it can buy,
I was a complete amateur. I had no idea how television programmes were made, one end of a television camera for another. I was quite shy. It was quite a sort of uphill struggle for me to do all that.
Nowadays, most business is done by handing over cheques rather than by passing over notes and coins.